Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start with our introductions, but let's get that rolling with each of you putting your name and organization in the chat for us, so we know who's here today and maybe where you're located. If that's not obvious in your organization name, that would be great. Thank you all for being here. I'm Patty Koval, the Director of Member Engagement and Learning with Virginia Funders Network, and we have a great crowd and we have an incredible program. And I just want to say thank you so much now to the members of our Impact Investing Office Hours Planning team who have been working with us for a number of years in trying to bring information to you all about impact investing and how you can add that to your portfolio of grant making and giving. And that was Stephanie Randolph, Michelle Nelson, Lisa O'Mara, Caroline Nowry, Deb, I see you've Markley has parked her, is here with us, and she has been part of the team in the past. And then Chris Crothers, who was not able to join us today, has also been very helpful. So without further time taken, I'm going to turn this over to Michelle Nelson with the Community Foundation for Greater Richmond and Stephanie Randolph with Purple Tiger Impact to officially get us started. So thank you all again for being here.
Thank you, Patty, and thank you everyone for joining us. As Patty mentioned, we've been holding these impact investing conversations for 2 years. And really what we're trying to do is whet your appetite. Everyone's in a different place in their learning journey. And as you know, if you know one foundation, you know one foundation. And our journeys to impact investing are equally as unique. And so today we're excited to bring in 2 foundations who have been on different journeys to share their stories. I can assure you, you are going to leave today with more questions than you started with, but your questions are going to be further along. And you're going to have more resources and more people that you know of who can come and help you and answer your questions as you move forward on your journey. But before we turn it over to our panel of experts today, I'd like to know a little bit more about you. Angie, can you tee up the survey? I just want to know who's on this call. Question 1. Do you represent like a board and investment committee, or are you a member of paid staff? And then question 2, how do you describe your foundation's level of interest and experience with direct impact investing? Are you just curious, educating staff and other board members? Are you exploring? Do you consider yourself engaged, meaning you've done 1 to 3 investments, intermediate, you've gotten your feet wet, you've done 4 or more? Or are you believers? Is this like integrated into your DNA? Where on your journey are you?
I'll give that survey 1 more minute and then we'll share the results. As Patty mentioned, I'm Michelle Nelson and I'm here from the Community Foundation for Greater Richmond here in Richmond, Virginia. Excited to be with you today.
All right, it looks like we have 100% answered, just about 100% answered. Want to close that out?
Sure. Great job, participants, on your first test on this call. It looks like we have a really good mix of board and investment committee and paid staff. So about 76% of us on the call are paid staff. The remainder are board and investment committee members. For the second question, it looks like we also have a broad range. 35% of us are curious, 29% are exploring, and it looks like 24%, which is a large amount, is they're believers. So their foundations are experienced impact investors, and it's embedded in their strategies. So we look forward to continuing the discussion today, and I will hand it over to Stephanie to introduce our panel.
And just before we get to our panel, I just want to do some basic definitions. We can go to the next slide. First of all, if you go out into the field, there is no agreed upon definition for impact investing. For our purposes today, we're going to define impact investing as the intentional deployment of capital that works to leverage the power of our capital to create positive change with specific and intentional impacts. Also, for the purposes of our conversations today, impact investing can happen across the spectrum of capital and capital returns. So often in historic and foundations, these two extremes have been siloed, where grants are only evaluated based on impact and our investments, the only consideration is financial return. What impact investing can allow is for a more blended capital approach that recognizes both funding and financing are often needed to create measurable social, financial, and environmental returns. So we have a very broad definition that we're going to learn about today and see how two different foundations have moved their journey forward. Starting with our friends at the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation, I'm grateful to have with us today Ebony Bugg, who's the Director of Community Investment, and Alex Gross, who is the Senior Donor Relations Manager. Alex and Ebony, can you tell us a little bit about what CACF does, a little bit about your asset size, your board and investment committee structure, so we can kind of ground ourselves and who was leading this process?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So for those of you who are not aware, the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation serves the city of Charlottesville and then the surrounding counties of Albemarle, Buckingham, Fluvanna, Greene, Louisa, Nelson, and Orange. We were established in 1967 by leaders of 3 community banks. We received the first bequest in 1969 and made our first grant in 1970. And then in 2003 was when we changed our name to the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation to represent our service just beyond the county of Albemarle. We currently have $295 million in terms of our assets under management. We have 397 funds and about 150 million sits within our donor advised funds. Our annual operating budget is a little over $3 million. And then we do obviously have a governing board, both an investment committee and then a very newly created and appointed local investing committee. And our investment committee is really sort of charged with ensuring that the foundation can provide outstanding risk-adjusted returns for the funds underneath our care. But we really recognize that there was a big opportunity for value alignment to ensure that our assets under management were helping us to meet both the needs of our community as well as our goals in terms of our equity commitment, our mission, and our vision for the community that we're serving. And that sort of helped lead us into thinking differently about how we use our invested assets beyond grant making. And sort of encouraged us to think about the value that we're creating both financially as well as in terms of the impact, which is what sort of led us to our impact investing journey.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you both for being here. The other foundation that we have today is a private foundation, the Weissberg Foundation, and we're grateful to have Nina Weissberg, who is both a trustee and the chair of the investment committee here with us today, and Rashawn Adkins-Roan, who is the executive director. Could you all provide some grounding in the Weissberg Foundation for those who are unfamiliar?
Yes, thanks so much, Stephanie, for having us. I am Rashawn Roan here with my colleague, Nina Weissberg. The foundation's mission is advancing organizations and efforts, building power of those most negatively impacted by racism. And we really believe that power building of those negatively impacted is the most transformative pathway to structural change. Can we have the about the foundation slide up? I'll just hit some high points. We are governed by, starting January 1st, a 10-member board, 5 family trustees and 5 independent trustees. Our endowment is just about $220 million. We are funding in power building for racial equity and justice very explicitly, and 70% of our funding is in Virginia and Appalachia, and 30% is national. In addition to our board, we have an investment committee where we made a commitment that 50% of the committee will be trustees in order to ensure that our mission remains central to the activities of the investment committee. And we have a community member, and I serve on the investment committee. And then our outsourced chief investment officer is Vivian Westfuller.
Thank you very much. And before I hand it over to Michelle for the next question, I want to encourage everybody, we're going to have time for questions later in the session, but if questions pop up and you don't want to lose track of them, please put them in the chat and we'll be sure to get to them as we proceed. Michelle?
So now that we know a little bit about your foundations, could you tell us how the impact investing conversation started in your foundation? Specifically, who ignited the conversation? What was their role? What were their motivations? How long ago did the process start? And for this question, we'll start with Weissberg.
Hi, I'm Nina Weissberg. Thank you for putting up that slide. So I wanted to go back to the questions that you asked at the very beginning, because this is a theme that's going to run for us throughout. We have mission aligned and impact investing in our DNA, but I don't consider us expert. So I wanted to put that right out front. I selected that one because it really is woven all the way through our IPS and everything we do. So if you go to the next slide. So this is a really busy slide. I don't know how it's showing up on other people's screens. And we decided not to edit it because what it really represents is how long this process has taken us. I think sometimes people fear they need to make the decision, jump right in and start. That is not the way it worked for us. And I'm not sure that it works that way for anyone. So we've been at this for over 10 years. Spending a lot of time listening and learning, which continues, which is why I don't profess to be expert. We are only at the very edge of really making catalytic investments. And there have been many lulls in between. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say about this slide, which you'll get to look at more closely when they send them on. The second thing for me is, you know, how do we get into this conversation? And so I looked for allies, for people who were talking about this to lean on and learn from. Joy Anderson at the Criterion at a Convergence conference was one of my very first. Veris Wealth Partners was really instrumental and was at a lot of these early conferences that I went to. Akasha Abshur, I always mispronounce her last name, was Intrinsic, wrote our first investment policy early on. But the spark, the spark was, I take credit for that. Oh my gosh, I forgot to put the timer on, you guys. So I don't know where I am, but I'll give it 2 more minutes. So the spark was me, and I really don't know that I have a very good answer for that. I asked myself in anticipation of today's question, and all I can say is that all the way back, I felt very suspicious of Wall Street. I felt suspicious of the exclusivity of the people who controlled it and the language. Some of the things that I use on the real estate side as productivity and success measures, I was not hearing on the investment side. So they weren't using the same criterion that I was looking at, like retention of employees and footprint, trade, where your things are coming from into the network. I felt like there were a lot of voices that were left out. They didn't look at retention of people. They didn't look at diversity of boards. And very early on, it felt like, how could you say that this company was successful when you had such a limited viewpoint of white men, older white men, usually making the decisions? Like, how would you know what young people wanted in that marketplace or different demographics?
All right. Thank you, Nina. Now we'll hear from Charlottesville.
Hi, everyone. Ebony Bug here, again, Director of Community Investment at CACF. I'll own being the spark for this at our foundation. And I think the things that sort of, sort of sparked that fed that kindling were a couple of things. First, hearing probably at one of my very first board meetings as a staff member here at the foundation, and one of our fund holders was attempting an impact investing strategy that the foundation simply didn't feel like they had the internal infrastructure to help facilitate. And that definitely got me interested in understanding what that meant, but also a kind of crash course in the thinking of our board and investment committee at that time around like what impact meant, what was a sound investment, what risk meant to them. I was coming in with very little finance background. And so, at that time, I didn't understand all of the pieces, and that kind of made me really curious. And then secondly, the slide that Stephanie shared earlier with that continuum, almost, I guess, probably within a few months of me starting at the foundation, Locust hosted a webinar around impact investing, shared that continuum. And at that time, I was primarily situated to focus on our discretionary grant making. And it was one of the first times I had seen folks link our investments to our grant making along a continuum. I was brand new to philanthropy, brand new to this role. And so, it was a big learning curve, but both of those things really resonated with me. And then finally, I would echo what Nina was just naming, which was a curiosity about like how folks were defining return and success, particularly when so much harm might be caused by investing in particular ways. How could we even consider it to be financially viable or a good investment when those investments might also be depleting our resources, contributing to unequal wealth accumulation. And so I think the thing that sort of animated my work at the Community Foundation overall is just that, how could we like dig a hole with a shovel on one side and then try to fill it with a spoon, on the other. And so that I think, led to, one thing led to another. And then, when the pandemic hit, we were sort of faced with both immediate urgency, but also the exposure of systems that simply just didn't work, and that grant making alone would not be able to fix. And we had the opportunity to do a very large recoverable grant on a really impactful program. And the success of that opened the doors for our board to get more curious about impact investing. And so we then joined a Locust learning cohort alongside 3 other community foundations across the country who were interested in and very similarly situated. They had done a kind of ad hoc deal because the conditions necessitated it, but really wanted to inculcate that within the culture of the organization and build out the infrastructure in order to replicate that kind of work. So I'll pause there.
Ebony, you've hit on something that's really critical. One of the reasons these impact investing journeys can be so complicated is that it involves education of staff, investment committee, and your trustees or your board members. Can you all reflect on what were some of the barriers you experienced with that multiple path journey? And what were some specific tools and resources, you just started hitting on one, that were particularly helpful in your processes? And in this case, Ebony, why don't you just continue and tell maybe a little bit more about Locust and other challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I was thinking about this and making my notes, I think change management across writ large is really the name of the game here. And we had to learn a lot along the way, particularly about how we were translating. Like the lexicon for this is so new that to be able to adequately articulate and meet sort of traditionally oriented investment and finance professionals to impact adjusted returns versus risk adjusted returns is no small thing. And then, you know, there was a lot of work to help our stakeholders understand like how we were different from a bank or even like a retirement fund. And that mission alignment for us meant something very different. And sort of mitigating fears about fund flight and donor flight were huge pieces that we had to overcome. It was, you know, it was challenging, and some folks from an ideological perspective really had a hard time discerning the difference between impact investing and ESG and all kinds of things. And so I think the things that helped us the most were being a part of the cohort and seeing that we weren't alone, but also having very clear and specific tools to help move us along. I think the survey that was conducted of our stakeholders during that process really helped us learn how our stakeholders were thinking about this, and gave us points of reference to develop educational opportunities and move folks along. We also had a change in our leadership of the investment committee, and someone who was newer to the area came in who was specifically working in an OCIO environment and focused specifically on impact investing. And so once we had someone on our investment committee who even just understood these terms and could help serve as a bridge and translate, that shifted things dramatically. And we also had like, once folks oriented from a place of curiosity, that's when we really started cooking. And it's not over, and we're still working on it and working through those things, but learning how to use our allies well was a huge way forward for us. And I'll also just say that, and I do want to shout out the Ann Arbor Community Foundation, because they were true learning partners and supporters along the way. They shared materials. They came and spoke to our board. Our board really needed to hear from another community foundation that was similarly situated, that they had done this, and hear the learnings from them. And that was huge. And then I'll also say for me, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have like engaged in a huge learning journey to be able to speak cogently and saliently about these topics. I attended the Common Fund Investment Stewardship Academy, and that was something that also boosted my learning and built out the network so that I could really gain the tools necessary to be able to lead on this work.
Wonderful. Allies, both internal and external,
Indeed.
are ringing true. Nina, Rashawn, what were some of the barriers and tools or resources that were critical to your process in navigating this multiple learning journey?
So my light keeps going out, you can see. I think Bridge and Translate, Ebony, was a really good one. I wrote that terminology down because I was going to say similarly. So our very first impact investment, our drop in the water, was with Root Capital. And it was a familiar group that came to us. So the introduction was through one of my sister's closest friends. She'd set up the Brooklyn Community Foundation, Sarah Williams. She now runs for Pell Capital. I like to say people's names and call them out. And Root Capital was run by an investment banker, someone off Wall Street, a white man. He spoke a language that our board understood. So who the messenger is in terms of taking those early steps is important. We set up an investment policy statement learning on the board. That was the brainchild of our previous executive director and was a terrific one, so that everyone on the board could read different kinds. That was a really, really good learning in terms of bringing people in. And barriers. My father had worked with the same investment advisors for many, many years. They were his trusted friends and advisors. And when we started the journey toward mission investment alignment to use every dollar, we promised him not to make any changes until his advisors were no longer available or there was extra funds. So compromises, slowing it down, making sure that we weren't alienating people who were important in the process. And I will turn it over to Rashawn for the second half of this conversation.
Thanks so much for that, Ebony and Nina. I think I would just add briefly, in order to help keep us on time, that committing to impact investing is not one decision. It's you open yourself to deciding again and again and again. And for us, at every turn, we said, yes, we're going in all in an impact. What questions do we even ask? Where do we start? And so we worked with a firm called Go to Key Consulting to really take a high level approach. They spoke to the entire board, reaffirmed that impact was the focus that we wanted, and helped us to get really crisp about what we were looking for. And so I would just say, be prepared to continue listening and learning, not just at the beginning, but throughout the journey. Yeah, I'll pause there.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I'm glad you fit that in. It was really great. We've looked at our journey so far for these two foundations. Let's try jumping to the present day. So what is each of your foundations? What does your journey look? What does your strategy look like today for impact investing? Are you taking a full corpus approach or working your way there? Can you share an example of how your foundation is thinking about that? And we'll start with Weissberg.
Thanks, Michelle. Happy to jump in here. And there's a slide that's great. Thank you so much. We are taking a full corpus approach. So our board has said that impact, and in particular racial equity impact, is paramount as we think about our investing. And so we're looking for impact across asset classes. Some of those are easier than others, but I think we're having some success. I will say, to Nina's point about this being in our DNA, we haven't necessarily made lots of investments, but we made many decisions that have embedded impact. And so the first I will name is selection of your OCIO, strategically choosing an outside chief investment officer who has a focus in impact. It's probably the single most important decision you might make. And then the selection of our managers within our global equities and fixed income, which I can talk about a little bit. But before that, I will say really quickly in terms of an example, one that we like to share is in cash, right? You can maintain liquidity while having a great deal of impact. So one of the programs that we're involved with is Advancing Communities Together. It's a deposit program where you can put $250,000 in community development finance institutions around the country for them to deploy that capital. And we have chosen to do that to every minority depository investment organization that is in the program. So actively saying we are placing our cash with NDIs so that they have what they need to move forward. If we can jump to the next slide, just really quickly on manager selection. Again, on the global equities and fixed income side of the ledger, this is something where you can have impact before you even make an investment. Really thinking about who your managers are, what capabilities they bring to the table, and how they're generating alpha. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that we're really proud of is that by asset allocation, 54% of our assets under management are managed by diverse investment managers. And that's diversity across race, diversity across gender, even diversity across country of origin, which is very helpful in our international portfolio. Do we have people representing the world that are influencing where our dollars are invested. I'll pause there. Oh, one other plug I did want to make. We are part of an inaugural shareholder engagement cohort that I commend highly to everyone. It's a group of foundations who are thinking through how do we become more actively engaged as asset holders, public equity asset holders, and it's sort of a 9-month boot camp that kicked off in September. We're going to be looking to share some of the learnings from that program, but there are cohorts of foundations, private, family, community foundations that you can be a part of to help push your impact forward.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Charlottesville so we can learn more. That was really helpful. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I really appreciated what Rashawn had said about how situating your funds with your OCIO can also lead to so much impact. We also recently went through an RFP process to identify a new outsourced chief investment officer, and are really excited about the potentials to be thinking about all of the assets under management with this new impact lens. And also just being able to offer some different types of investment products for both our fund holders as well as our agency fund holders who might want something a little bit more customizable, while also being able to center impact in a new and different way. And similarly, are now beginning to have conversations about who our banking partner is, and recognize that even being able to have a local bank can have really positive impact with how we're situating our funds and our cash. I don't know that I explicitly said this at the beginning, but we took a 5% allocation approach. That is about $8.75 million that will be sort of directed for these local impact investments, but are anticipating taking sort of a phased approach. So we have not made any investments to date. We are anticipating kicking things off in late 2025 or early 2026, and we'll likely sort of start with 1% of that 5% to begin with, and really sort of see that as a way to both build our capacity and our muscle, as well as beginning to get some of the capital flowing out into the community. But I think we are sort of taking some similar approaches, you know, in that we may not be able to say 100% of our corpus is impact invested, but wanting to make sure that we really are intentionally aligning how we're thinking about everything from like who our bank is and where that cash sits to these larger scale investments. I mean, is there anything else that you would add?
Only just to reinforce what Rashawn was saying, and the importance of your OCIO partner. You know, some of the reasons that we've been moving this slowly is that we just haven't had the ability to really institute a lot of these changes with our previous partner. And so that was a significant component of our RFP process from the very beginning. And we were really pleasantly surprised by how people showed up to and responded to that. So I just want to reinforce that that's absolutely the first step. And I believe that we aspire to a full portfolio impact strategy, and luckily have some some unexpected decisions to make that might push us in that direction faster than we had anticipated. So we're looking forward to thinking about just how even our cash management is going to deliver some impact for us.
I'm going to ask one more question before we move to audience questions. And if you don't want to forget them, feel free to add them to the chat. Now that you have this in your toolbox, how has this changed how you look at high impact projects? Can you give me a specific example of how projects that may or may not be investment ready, but have financial returns as a part of the bigger picture, how you now look at them, how you engage with your grantees? And we'll start with our friends from CACF.
That's a great question. I think just to keep it within the frame that we've been talking about, that continuum is now like firmly embedded in how we're looking at every investment that we're making in the community. And so I think that's probably the most salient frame of reference for us. So such that if something comes in, you know, once we launch as being vetted as like a, you know, sort of an investment from our long-term pool, which has some specific return needs, but doesn't meet those criteria, then we're prepared. And that's one of the reasons why like Alex is really focused on donor engagement and co-investment. So she's going to be along for the ride one way or the other, where we anticipate many of these investments having multiple components. And that's what we've been seeing more so than anything from our partners. So they're structured in, you know, sort of really layered ways. So there may be a grant, a line of credit, and some an investment, a traditional investment that on the same project. So we're both looking at like the array of tools that we can bring to a single investment, but also how we might move someone through a process where they might eventually land in a different part of the house. And so I do think it's broadened our horizons as we're looking at inquiries from our grant partners, and has absolutely facilitated cross-team de-siloing and collaboration in order to move some of these really impactful programs and projects forward. And I'll just check in with Alex to see if you want to chime in there.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is that we had a project that I think the Weissberg Foundation is going to speak to, where we were able to bring a number of potential investment partners together. And that really got catalyzed by a grant. So that was sort of the entry point into the community foundation for this organization, was a chance for us to learn about them, to provide some of that seed funding that then sort of snowballed into these larger investment opportunities. And so I do really appreciate that continuum of recognizing that it may not be an investment to begin with, but how can our assets and our resources be sort of the catalyst that then leads to these future opportunities.
Nina or Sean, what example would you provide?
Well, what I think is interesting, and I am honored to share the space, Alex and Ebony, with the two of you, is these are really different organizations and we've taken different journeys. So at this point, all of our asset classes are 100% mission aligned. That doesn't mean they're concessionary, but they're 100% mission aligned. So we're thinking about every dollar. We are at that point in our process. And we've taken 10% and said that 10% will be catalytic first. But even on that 10%, this isn't on the grant side. It's not a PRI. It's coming out of the endowment. And we didn't say that it was at no rate of return. So in our IPS, it is a 3 to 5%. I looked it up this morning, targeted rate of return for that 10%. So there may be things that are extremely concessionary, and there may be things that we think are catalytic, but actually have a very good rate of return. We're at the beginning of figuring out how that catalytic part of the endowment works. So I wanted to bring that up because high impact for us is going to have a broad range, and we're at the very beginning of it. And then I'll turn it over to Rashawn in the slides to talk about this collaborative project that we're very excited to be part of.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. And thanks to so many partners who are on the phone, from Holly Hatcher, the work you're doing, Locust, CACF, two opportunities that we'd love to talk about. One, of course, is Beacon Kitchen, which is amazing, in Charlottesville, Virginia, 11,000 square feet, commercial use shared kitchen, particularly with a particular focus on Black food entrepreneurs in Charlottesville, given the history of disinvestment inability to build Black wealth in Charlottesville. And this project came to us through the network. I think Lisa mentioned it to us, Stephanie mentioned it to us, and it was moving so quickly that we couldn't get on board, but then another opportunity came. And I'll be really frank, we love this project. We are committed to this project working, but it didn't meet the bar for being investment ready for us. And so what we were able to do was provide a grant on that side of the house. And then I think even more important was providing a wonderful person who is really building organizational capacity to get the organization and the concept to the point where we can say, okay, now it's investment ready and we can go all in on that capital. So thank you to everyone who's part of that project. And I know they are actively looking for investors as well as grant funds. And so this is a plug. If you'd like to know more, a number of us could connect you. The second opportunity, just really quickly, dovetails a little bit into how are we messaging to our grantees about the capital stack that's available to them? And we're at the point now where we have grantee partners saying, you mentioned that you might do loans. And so Rappahannock Indian Tribe, which is one of our multi-year general operating support grantees, came and said, we're doing a 964-acre land acquisition. Land back is a pillar for us, but the money won't come in before closing. Could you do a bridge loan for us? And so, and that's another project I know they are fundraising for. If you have grant capital or loan capital that you'd like to deploy, would love to be in partnership with you around that. And so I think there is something for us to do around educating our grantees and our community partners about the various tools that we have at our disposal and how they might be helpful to them.
Thank you. We could do an entire session on the Beacon Kitchen because it really uplifts the power and the essential role we all play in the investment ecosystem. And the greatest thing, if you're trying to help a grantee who may be an investee, is to recognize we all have different risk measurements and we all have different financial returns that we're seeking, and we have a range of that. And so the more clarity we have, the more we can help that partner. So knowing your partners in the investment ecosystem is essential. Opening it up to you all. Questions from the audience. You can raise your hand, you can turn yourself off mute, or we have more questions for them. And we can leave the slides behind.
Well, I'll kick us off with a question. I hope that's okay. Rashawn, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your shareholder engagement strategy and the platform you're using. Like, what's your lens on that? What's your strategy? What do you hope to accomplish through that shareholder engagement work?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Michelle. I will start off by saying, I think when we got into this work, the piece that I was so excited about was the 10% catalytic. Mm-hmm. And it's really a credit to our OCIO who said, yes, you will do the 10% catalytic and it will be transformational. 40% of your endowment is in global public equities. And they started to talk about some of the powerful work being done around racial equity and justice, around shareholders proposing racial equity audits, around companies making commitments to worker safety and training. Walmart is the biggest employer of African Americans in the country. And so if there's an opportunity for us to have impact on its practices through our shares, they really got us excited. And then a phenomenal group of foundations. This is everyone from Sierra Club to Roy and Patricia Disney to World Education Services that have come together, about 12 of us, to learn. Every foundation is different. We are relatively small. At Full Tilt, we have 5.75 people. So we don't have an impact investment specialist. That is me and with Mina. Other foundations, they have dedicated people who run shareholder engagement. And one of the things I've appreciated about this program is that it is helping us right size our engagement for our internal capacity. So for us, our goal initially is not to write shareholder proposals and be at that level of advocacy. We're really starting with evaluating our proxy voting, evaluating our managers and whether they're voting our proxies according to our mission, vision, and values. And right now we have a setup where they vote their proxy, our proxy, and then let us know about it. Eventually, we want to get to where they're sharing their proxy votes and what they'd like to vote, and we are saying yes or no, but that requires time and capacity. So I will say proxy voting is number one. The second is participating in coalitions of shareholders. So one of the groups we belong to is the Racial Equity Investors Collective. And as a collective, this group is highlighting, and they exist for every issue, reproductive freedom. They do the work of highlighting for us. These are the proxies that are coming up that are relevant that you need to make sure your managers are supporting. And they also bring us the resolutions to say, if you have shares in these stocks, please sign on. And so a first step for us was just asking for a list of all of our shares across managers so that we're able to respond when we get these inbound requests. If I have time, the one thing I would share that's particularly relevant for this group, one of the most innovative things we're seeing is out of Denver, where a group of foundations led by AJL Foundation have come together to focus specifically on Denver and Colorado-based public companies and to act as a group. And I think the opportunity for us to do that as funders together in Virginia is very powerful. We have some time before we can get there, but those are some of the things that I think could be in our future.
Thank you.
I have a question about messaging to grantees. How are you all, I mean, a grant is easy, right? There's no financial return. How are you making the case to them that that an investment, a recoverable grant or a loan is actually a better option for them? And then part two is, how are you messaging this to your donors, especially for the community foundation?
I'll start us off here. I think there is, I think it's rather than like naming, I think it's about having a complete array of tools that are right-sized for the conditions. And I think that, one of the things that we're seeing from folks is that because folks only can see grants, they're not thinking strategically about how they might engage with capital in a different way. And so I think I see this as rather like a learning opportunity for folks to be thinking about scaling and growth in a different kind of way. And I think the Beacon project is a really good example of that, to be honest with you. Like, it became very clear that the project needed significantly more capital than was available, like as a grant in the community, but they were also afraid of debt, and they weren't attractive to traditional lenders, particularly since the project doesn't hold any collateral. And so I think it's really about being in right relationship to our grant partners to understand what their impact goals are, And if they are in a position to be able to scale that in ways that are meaningful for our community, not just growth for the organization, then we want to have the appropriate tools available to support them. And then I think the donor piece is twofold, right? Like we are going to, since we are getting a new OCIO, a lot of the conversations about what we're doing related to impact investing will be wrapped into communications about how that relationship is just simply going to help refine and enhance our offerings overall. And so there'll be a significant, sort of communication strategy as it relates to that. But then there's also like the conversations that we're talking to donors about, like co-investment and what that means and what that looks like. And so I'll pause and check in with Alex because that's her particular wheelhouse.
Yeah, when I think about how we talk about this with our donors and our fund holders, I really see impact investing as a part of the community foundation's value proposition, right? Just by situating your assets with us, you are now having a direct impact in your community, in your backyard. And rather than these assets all sitting in Wall Street, they are now being invested in Main Street. And I think that's why people would choose to come to the community foundation and to be a partner with us. And similarly, I think that this is a real opportunity for us to think about how we are thought leaders and how we are partners with our fund holders in new and creative ways. On the slide that the Weissberg Foundation had shared about all of the co-investors on the Beacon project is one of our fund holders who initially expressed some hesitancy around investing in this project. They pulled out and then they pulled back in. And have decided to do a recoverable loan to help provide some flexible capital to help buy down some of the debt. They want to be involved. And so I think it's a matter of thinking about who the right partners are, who is willing to think flexibly and creatively with us, and understanding sort of the risk tolerance of each of our fund holders, recognizing that, they're going to be interested and willing to participate in different things, but that we want to be able to bring them along with us and present these opportunities to them.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly. I was thinking about the question. So not all of ours are going to come from our grantees, but that is certainly one path. And to Alex's point, we want to see how much of this catalytic can be place-based, so that if our mission is Virginia and Appalachia and the aligned states, can we also allocate particularly that 10% catalytic first to that same place-based location? But it's not easy. And Rashawn and I have spent a lot of time talking about who are the consultants we need and where do these feeds come from? And as we keep saying, I think this group is a great one. So some of it will come from our grantee partners, and some of it, like Beacon Kitchen, will come from this alignment. And I think it will be great to deepen that into Virginia, past Charlottesville and Richmond, where we know best, and see if there are some investments that we can make that are further outside of what I think of as the areas where most of our connectivity, and I should say mine, Rashawn and the people working on the ground in Virginia, are farther afield than I am. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Thanks, Nina. I just want to say, I think education with our grantee partners and communicating with them is important. And I don't want it to get lost that we have to do that internal communication with our program officers, who are really the people every day talking with grantees, so that they have the capability and the, not capability, but the comfort to talk about the various tools in the toolkit. And so if we have all of these tools available, and yet our first line of contact is not able to talk through that, we won't get to where we want to go. So let's be thoughtful about how we create spaces for program folks to get comfortable sharing this message.
I've so enjoyed our time together, and I know others feel the same way. As we wrap this session, could I just ask one final question? And that's, what words of advice or support would you like to offer others on their impact investing journey, regardless of how far along they are? I'll start with Charlottesville.
I think it's to be bold and fearless. We don't really have time for half measures anymore, I think. But also to like pace yourself and to take care of yourselves, because it's a lot of undoing, unlearning, in order to really implement on these strategies, as well as, you know, the work of it all. So yeah, I think it is to make some bold moves, and to lean into peers for support. Alex?
I think that was perfect. I was gonna say, yeah, learning from your peers, and sort of not being afraid to ask questions. You know, thing that I've learned is there is no dumb question. You will uncover so much more by just asking the thing that's on your mind.
It's interesting. I love the fact that you all are about, you know, be bold, don't jump. And I think that's fantastic, because I wrote, you know, patience. And I say that partly to myself, because when I first started at this journey, I was infuriated that the people on my board wouldn't come along. And so, but I stuck with it. That was 2014, 2013, even earlier. And I won't say what happened in those first conversations, but basically I was thrown out of the room, and this was by family members. So the next right step sometimes is the best to do. And even now, over 10 years later, we often remind ourselves we are on this learning journey. We can only make the next right step. So keep learning. It's okay sometimes to compromise. The messenger matters. Those are mine. But, you know, I wish I could be on the bold, just go for it train. Rashawn?
Yeah, I'll echo what everyone has said and just mention again, this is not one decision. This is a course of decisions, of asking yourself at every turn, how are we deploying the totality of our assets for impact? I love, Alex, that you lifted up the selection of your bank. Who are your consultants? Who are your lawyers? Who are your accountants? There are so many ways that we can make impact as foundations, and approach every decision will have impact. Name it and just align with a positive impact.
I want to extend not only my appreciation to Nina, Rashawn, Ebony, and Alex, but my admiration. What you all have done is remarkable. What you are going to do is even more amazing. So thank you, and thank you for sharing your stories. To those that have been listening in, these are resources for you. They are more than happy to answer the questions as it relates to just your foundation. And there are also other people on this webinar who have deep experience. I see just in the top of my screen, DeWitt and the Harvest Foundation. They've been on this journey. We have the Locust team here. Michelle, as you know, is here. VFN has a pool of resources that are available for you. And if you're interested in housing, reach out. We'll find somebody who's interested in the specific thing that you're interested in, or somebody who's learning along the way. But again, to the four of you, thank you. I've been wanting to do this panel for a year and a half because I've been on the sidelines cheerleading and eagerly waiting for this unveiling. So thank you. Feel free to reach out to them. Also, if you have not registered for the VFN annual meeting tomorrow at 3 o'clock, that link was just dropped in the chat for you. There will be a survey. And if there's something else you want to talk about in future office hours, or if you want to hear Eric Horvath talk about the shareholder engagement project, send VFN an email, send Patty an email, so that we can keep making these sessions relevant to you. Beyond that, this is a crazy time of year for us in the foundation world. As Ebony says, take care of yourselves and take care of those that you are with, and much gratitude to you all. Have a great day.